Hello, this is the Lost Lake Run webinar series. The Lost Lake Run is a 16-mile mountain race that raises money for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. The Lost Lake Run is held the fourth Saturday of each August, and the 2020 Lost Lake Run will be held August 22nd. The Lost Lake Run webinar series invites a wide variety of speakers to talk about different aspects of trail running, training, nutritious, and also cystic fibrosis. For more information about the Lost Lake Run or the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, please see the notes below. I hope you enjoy this webinar. Good evening and welcome to the Lost Lake Run webinar. It's June 3rd, 2020. And I believe this is our 8th or 9th webinar. This evening, we're fortunate to have with us Lisa Keller. Lisa is the principal in multi-sport training of Alaska, and we're very fortunate to have her this evening. Tell us a little bit how she trains athletes. So good evening, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi, Pat. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I always like to start off with the origin story. Where were you born and raised, and and kind of how did you get to sports and physical activity, and then ultimately make the decision that you wanted to make a career out of this?
Well, I was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska, and it was 2 months before the 1964 earthquake, which my parents are living out in Turnagain, and so I slept through the whole 1964 earthquake. And so I think being in Alaska for that and just growing up in Alaska had a huge impact on me because we're such a different place. And I think I was really fortunate in that I had a dad from Montana. He was super, super active. So we were skiing up at Arctic Valley when I was like 4 years old, back in the time when Arctic Valley only had pit toilets, and we were skiing and we were hiking in the Chugach in the summer. And he had played baseball in college. And so when Title IX passed in 1972, but Anchorage was already kind of like with it in giving girls opportunities in sports. I mean, I didn't really notice a big difference here, whereas I know like just women who were born a couple of years earlier than me, who lived in the lower 48, grew up being able to, maybe play tennis or be a cheerleader. Their sports were really limited. We were not limited up here. And then I also had these parents who really encouraged me to be active and be outside. So I played baseball because my dad had played baseball. And then the Girls and the Boys Club brought soccer, organized soccer for young people. And so I started playing soccer. And when I was 12, that's when I really got into running. I went to Lake Otis Elementary and we would have a field day. And that was in 5th and 6th grade. And it was just the running activities that I really loved. And then I carried that all the way through into middle school at Wendler. And then I ran at East High School. At that time, there wasn't soccer in the Anchorage School District. So I ran cross country, I Nordic skied my senior year, and I ran track. And my senior year, I was the state champion in the 800 meters and ran all the relays too. So I was kind of like more of a middle distance runner. I liked cross country, but I really liked track because I love competition and I love the tactics of track. Yeah, so that was really my primary sport.
Just as an adjunct, small state, I was at that track meet. Turns out you and I are the same age. And
oh no, really? You mean the track meet at Chugach High School in 1982?
1982, yeah, I did shot put and discus that year.
Oh, that is so crazy.
Yeah, so it's a small state for sure.
It is, it really is.
I didn't win. Anyway.
I think you competed against my friend Tim Edwards. He was a senior that year and he was our thrower at East High School.
Oh my gosh, wow. Yeah, though there was a lot of good shot putters. And of course there's a kid from Bartlett that came a few years later who went on and won 4 national championships, NCAA Division I, a guy named Jordan Clark. So we've had some very accomplished track athletes up here, and we're very fortunate. So you went from high school track and field and running. Did you go off to college and also pursue sports?
Yeah, so I went to University of Oregon in Eugene, which of course is a big running school. But when I left, I was like, I don't want to be a runner. I was kind of known as that, as a runner. And, I am a lot rebellious, not even somewhat rebellious, but I don't like to do what people think I should do. So when I went to college at University of Oregon, I played soccer actually. And soccer at that time, our senior year, it was the first year soccer was played in the Anchorage school district. And I had chosen track over soccer that year. And so then I went to University of Oregon and I walked on. It was a high level club team at that time. So, I mean, we were doing everything a varsity team would do, having double workouts and traveling to play soccer. It just wasn't a varsity sport at that time. So I played soccer for that year. And I think partway into my sophomore year at University of Oregon. And then there was a guy named Joe Deneen. I still see him occasionally. He went to West High School and he was living in the apartment above me my sophomore year. He was a year ahead of me. And so we knew each other because of the Anchorage connection. He had a roommate who had done the world's toughest triathlon. At that time, it was an Ironman length triathlon in Lake Tahoe. Mm-hmm. And because it's at elevation, so it was considered really hardcore back then. And so that guy's name was Nick, and Nick said, because I had lots of injury, I ended up with a stress fracture in high school that ended up into a break in my tibia. I was in a cast actually during cross country my senior year. And so he said, oh, you should try this new sport. It's called triathlon. And he said, swim, bike, and run. And can you swim? And I'm like, yeah, I learned to swim at the spa, down by Valley of the Moon Park. And I had swam through much of my youth, but I had not been a competitive swimmer. And of course I knew how to ride a bike. And so in 1984, I did my first triathlon in Oregon. And I fell in love with that sport because running every day, my body can't handle running every day. It's just too hard on my body. And the great thing with triathlon is you have these two other sports that you can throw in and kind of save your body, for running. And my best times have always been when I've also been training for triathlon during the season. So my best running times. So it worked out really well for me.
I mean, when you were training in 84, how many hours a week, just out of curiosity, were you training?
I don't know, because I was what you would call a random trainer at that time. I just did whatever, I had really no sense. The sport was so new, and you got to remember like Dave Scott and Mark Allen, those dudes were just like putting on massive mileage, that their whole lives became consumed, and they would just go out and do all this massive mileage. And I wasn't doing massive mileage, but, I was only, 20 years old. You can get away with a lot when you're young, and so I don't know, sometimes I would train a couple hours a day. Maybe I wouldn't do anything, but I had a lot. I mean, part of being at a high level of competition is that you have some genetics on your side, and it takes you applying the resistance and working on the training to get those genetics to express themselves, of course, but you can also slide a lot just because you have that backup in your pocket, Yeah.
I went to school at University of California, San Diego, and it was triathlon city in that time frame, 82 to 86 was when I was in school. And I'd see him. I was a swimmer, so I'd see him at the pool all the time. And boy, there's some very fit people, I gotta say.
Yeah.
And then they go down to La Jolla Cove and swim around the buoy and back, which was a mile. And then they go run the beach. And I mean, oh my goodness, they were just amazing.
We were in college and you were like in the hotbed of it. I mean, San Diego is where triathlon started, Mm-hmm. We think about Ironman, but really the first triathlon was in San Diego.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And there was some bar, I can't remember the name of the bar, but some bar owner in San Diego in the 70s put on a triathlon, decided, oh, this is a good idea. Let's do a swim, bike, run. And so all of those guys, Mark Allen and Dave Scott, I mean, they were also up in Davis, California, but a lot of them were hanging out in San Diego and training together in San Diego. So you were right in the middle of it.
Was right in the hotbed, didn't even know it.
Yeah.
So you went from college, and then you got your degree. Then
my degree is in political science, by the way. It's
political
nothing
science. No kidding.
political science, nothing exercise related. Yeah.
I'll be darned. That is a surprise.
Yeah.
I would have thought exercise physiology or biology or something like that.
Yeah, no, I got to be honest, I'm not a science person. I tend to glaze over with science. I mean, obviously over the years, I've become much more comfortable in the area of exercise physiology and stuff, just because I've been through so many certifications and so many trainings.
Yeah.
But my first love, I mean, I started off as a journalism major and then shifted to political science because I just love that kind of interaction, that intellectual interaction that you get from talking about current events and politics and government.
Yeah, I could see that. So how do you go from a political science, a poli-sci degree to exercise?
So let's see, I came back to Anchorage in 1986. And if you remember coming back to Alaska after we graduated from college, we were in the middle of a recession. It was really bad. There were no jobs. Yeah. And when you come back with a degree in political science, there's really no jobs. And my parents had just opened a retail quilt store. And so I kind of fell into that for the summer. And then within a year of that, the YMCA was looking for a membership director. And I was like, wow, I would love to work at the YMCA. That sounds like my dream job, you know, to be doing, being active and helping other people be active. So I originally went over to the YMCA as a membership director. And I was also doing, I was really active in the running and the triathlon community here in Anchorage. Jay Caldwell, if you remember him, he was putting on a lot of triathlons. And of course there was the women's run at that time, not the Run for Women. And there were just like lots of opportunities. There were trail runs, there was everything, you know. So I was active in all that, and I was also playing women's league soccer. So I was still playing soccer as well. And so I went along as a membership director for a little while, and then I ended up eventually meeting a guy and leaving Alaska to travel with him for a little while. And I had met him in Telluride, Colorado, because I'd been out there visiting another old boyfriend. And so I met Rob, and then we traveled for a while. So I left that job at the YMCA and lived in Telluride. He's from San Diego, actually, Solana Beach, and he went to UCSD as well. And then I was in the winter, it was January 1993, and I just missed Alaska so much. I mean, I was living in Telluride, which is supposed to be like the coolest place to live. And I'm like, I want to be home in Alaska. And so at that time, my friend Beth Edmonds, who we have that connection with Weston through, she had emailed me, or not emailed me, she'd written me a letter, and she said, or called me at the house I was living in and said, hey, we need a fitness director at the YMCA. Do you want to come back to the YMCA? And I'm like, yes, I want to come home. And so I got in my truck, and in January, drove up to Bellingham, took the ferry to Haines, got stuck in Haines for 6 days because there was a big blizzard, drove from Haines to Anchorage, arrived like February 2nd or 3rd or 4th or something like that, and went to work as a fitness director at the YMCA. And so that really kind of solidified my path of like, this is what I want to do. I want to work in this field. And I just really, really loved it. And then as the years went by, you know, I got married and then also got divorced when my children were really young. And at that point I had been doing some part-time work for Alaska Sports Academy, which was owned by Kim and Kurt Brownsberger, and they were getting ready to leave the state. And Kim said, you know, do you want to take over? We're leaving. Here's my mailing list. Why don't you take over the running group?
Wow.
And so, yeah. And so that was like, it I'm pretty old, so there's a lot of history here, but I had just gone through through cancer treatment. I had breast cancer, and so my marriage was splitting up, and I needed a job. I needed a way to make a living and stay in my house, and it just all worked out. So I started with that one running group. She handed over her mailing list, which at the time there was no email. It was just a mailing list. So the very first time I was soliciting people, I sent out a letter. And after that, email made it much easier. And then I just started adding groups. I had swim groups. I started doing private individual coaching. And then it just went from there. So there's many other paths off of that.
Now that one of those paths was you had a timing group with two other of your colleagues called Up and Running. And how did that experience go?
That was two other YMCA people. We just had this really close connection between people who had worked at the YMCA in the late 80s and early 90s. So Lori Bassett and Greta Barbaro. And the three of us, at the time, the city was doing some timing. So they had timing equipment, but nobody else was doing electronic timing. So we saw that niche, and we're like, not only do organizations need timing, but some organizations need event management. Like the Gold Nugget Triathlon is a perfect example. Such a huge race that they need somebody, not just a volunteer board, but they need to hire somebody to help put on this race. So we did that, and that was really fun because our kids, mine and Lori's kids, were little. So our kids came and helped us do these races, and so they got jobs when they were like 8, 9, 10 years old, and they were working for us. And one of the races we did was Lost Lake. I can't remember how many years we did it. Maybe
4 or 5. It was all the way up.
Oh, was it that many?
You decided to the first year we used Michael Freeze. And then your business came in, and so that would have been 2007. So like 2008 to I think 12 or somewhere around there was, and so until you decided you no longer were going to do Up and Running, we were very happy with, but that's how we came to meet, of course, was through that. Greta was the person we saw quite a bit because I think you like to run the race. So you would Greta would time.
Well, I don't think I was running it during that time. I was looking back at the results. I think the last time I ran the race was 1996.
Okay. Yeah, that was a while.
I think Greta and Lori came down together the first couple of years, and then all three of us came for a couple of years together.
Because we started pretty dramatically during that time period, and we started to max out our permit and got pretty busy there. Yeah. So,
it was always a fun adventure to do it, though.
Yeah, well, we missed you guys. We use Skinny Raven now, and we're very happy with their services. They're fantastic. So we've been fortunate because that's the one thing you don't mess up.
Right, exactly. And the funny thing about that is my daughter, Sienna, who is the youngest of, I had 2 girls and Lori had 2 boys, and our kids were all stair-stepped, basically. They were all a year apart on down. Sienna's the youngest of the 4. Sienna ended up for a couple of years working for Skinny Raven in events and timing, and she came down with Mark a couple times and timed the race. So it's kind of funny, those connections,
Yeah, Mark's great. I really enjoy working with him. So
I like working with him too.
So let me kind of segue now into the training part, because you're very well known for training running athletes, triathletes. What is the process? Let's say I came in, I've never experienced a professional training of any sort. I jog on the weekends kind of thing. Maybe I put in 5 to 8 miles a week kind of thing, so I'm okay fit. What would you do with someone like me if I said, I want to run a marathon, or I want to run a 10K, or I want to do a Lost Lake run?
Well, the very first thing is I would sit down with you and really figure out, do you have a pattern to what you're doing, and how many times a week are you running? How long are those runs? What's the effort level of those runs? What you want to be careful of when you start training for any longer event, especially, is that you don't go too far, too fast, too soon, because those things are what are going to put you at a higher risk for injury.
Mm-hmm.
And really the very first goal you should always have with any race is that you get to the start line healthy. You don't have any injury going on, you haven't run yourself into the ground. So that should always be your very first goal. And then you want to look at some other kind of feeling goals, like you want to not have you want the race to be fun. Even though there's hard parts of the race, you want the race to be fun. So you need to have some training that's set up that's going to get you to having a fun race, even though at times it may be uncomfortable, because another goal should be you want to have your best performance, whether that is a 1 hour 45-minute Lost Lake, or whether it's a 4.5 hour Lost Lake or a 5 hour Lost Lake. You want to do your best, because otherwise you could just go out and do it anytime, right? I mean, just go cross over Lost Lake. But a race should be kind of a special time where you throw yourself a little bit of a challenge, see that you can do the best possible job, whether it's walking the whole thing or running the whole thing. So I would look at, first of all, taking your runs and having a pattern of runs. So for instance, if you have 3 runs a week, which I think is kind of, like I said, with triathletes, you can go 3 runs a week and still have, I mean, I've run a 3-hour marathon on 3 runs a week because I was doing triathlons too. I think the year I had my fastest Lost Lake, which was 2:02, I was training primarily for triathlons that year. Although I did run a road marathon later that year. So I do remember that. But you want to have 3 critical runs a week that should be separated by at least 1 day each. And one run, no matter, I would say up to the marathon distance, you want to have as a speed run on a track, doing intervals at 10K pace or 5K pace or faster. And then another run is a tempo run, which is slower than 10K pace. It's generally 15K pace to half marathon pace, but it's over an extended like 20 to 40 to 60 minute time period. And those runs are really all about almost not even as much the physical part as the mental part, because you have to do this somewhat hard effort that continues to feel harder as you're doing it, but you can do that pace, but it's really your brain that's going to let you stop. So you have to kind of forge through that. And then probably for long races, one of the most critical runs would be your long run. And that should be the 3rd run of the week, which for most people is usually like on a Saturday. And then if you went on a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday pattern, then you have Saturday, and then you have 2 days before you do a hard run again. So it gives you a little bit more recovery at the end of that 3 every other day cycle, And the critical piece about the long runs, if you're only, doing maybe 5-mile runs, or in triathlon, we think more on time than on distance. So maybe it's a 45-minute run.
Sure.
You don't want to go from a 45-minute run one week to building your long run to an hour and a half the next week. So that is probably one of the more critical pieces, that you have to build it very slowly. So really, it's great if you can give yourself 6 months to train for a race that's as long as Lost Lake, because that gives you time to really build that long run slowly, start to do some faster stuff. And in the first 3 months of that training, you're doing some more general stuff, just building your longer runs. Starting to get a little bit faster on the track, starting to do longer tempo runs. But closer to the race, you're doing more specific runs. So you're running on trails that are closer to what you're going to run in Lost Lake. You're doing things that are very specific to that race.
Now, would you actually go out and do the Lost Lake Trail as your long run, maybe, as you get closer?
That's tricky. One of the critical things about racing is definitely that you want to know the course.
Yeah.
So definitely I would think, if you've never done it before, it'd be very helpful to be out on that course. And of course, things sometimes change because of the weather, or maybe there's been some trail work that's changed the trail somehow. So it is good to know that stuff. But if if your long run is gonna be 5 hours, I wouldn't do that necessarily. I think the speedsters, they can go out, maybe they're gonna race it an hour, 45 minutes to the women are gonna be somewhere around 2 hours under or a little bit over the top women. So I wouldn't go out there and run that at that point in your training. You might run and hike and stop and just be more familiar with the trail, or take the trail and chunk it out and go, okay, I'm gonna run the first, because I really look at Lost Lake, it's like 3 different races. It's like the first third is up, where you might be doing a lot of speed hiking.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of goes back to like too as well, like that you need to incorporate that speed hiking into your training, because you're not going to run that whole first third. I mean, some people can run, the top guys and very top women like Christy Way Thomas is probably running that, you know.
Yeah, Jerry Ross ran it.
Right, back in the day. But, you know, I think when I look back, I have one of the fastest times on that course. And me and Nina Kemple were together during most of the race. And both Nina and I at points on that first third were speed hiking. You know, we ran most of it, but we had a little bit of speed hiking in there too. So that needs to be incorporated into your training. Okay. So maybe if you were going to go out there and run it, maybe you run that part hard and do the last part easy, or maybe if you have more time to go out there and run it, maybe you do the first part easy, then the middle part, which I look at more rolly up, do that part hard, and then the last part easy. And then you've got to be doing some downhill running, because that's such an extended amount of downhill that by the time you get up there and you're starting to run down, I mean, your legs are seriously on the verge of feeling like they're going to fall out from underneath you.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting how you've broken it kind of into these thirds, and then depending maybe on the strength of the runner and the area where they're most comfortable, you might emphasize one portion over another. You know, maybe somebody's got, I've heard hockey players are really good at hills. You know, so maybe you've got somebody with a hockey background and great cardio, and they might go way up the hill, but when it comes to the downhill side, they're not quite as good because their knees are a little bad or something.
Yeah.
I remember I asked Bradley Cruz to write an article about training, and what he wrote was that if he's running downhill and he hasn't fallen at least twice, he's not running hard enough. Like, really? But you know, I guess that's the battered and bruised approach. But there are various approaches for sure. So when someone comes to you, you would really ask kind of where, you know, or maybe you'd have to feel that out as part of their training process over those 6 months.
Yeah, it's, you know, I really specialize in working with people who are new to the sport, or, you know, kind of in the middle of their age group, not necessarily the top. I mean, I have a few top age groupers or top overall athletes that I work with, but my specialty is really the people who are just getting into this or have been in it for a couple of years and maybe want to start to try to take it up a notch. And I think the thing that I run into the most is that people will, when I say, what is your goal? So many of those people will say, I just want to finish. And I'll be like, no, you're going to finish. You know, that, of course, that should be like that should be the goal that you're going to accomplish no matter what, you know? So if you have an A goal, a B goal, and a C goal, your C goal might be that I'm going to finish, or maybe even that's D. Maybe your C goal is that I'm going to finish in 5 hours. And your B goal is I'm going to finish in 4 hours. And your A goal is I'm going to finish right under 4 hours. So it's really, really important to set those goals so that you know how to train for it. Otherwise, like I said, you could just go out and you don't have to do the race. You could just go out and hike it and you're going to finish it, right?
Sure.
Races can be a little bit about challenging yourself.
With 6 months, I mean, that's for someone that's probably new to training, and even somebody that's regularly training, that's a long time from the time you start training to the time you have, let's call it a payoff, the event. Do you
Right.
you put other events in the middle there, or some milestone kind of things, so that they can kind of get a read on what they're doing, and at the same time maybe get enervated or excited about their progress?
Yes, absolutely. That's a really good point that you just made. It is really important to have. So when you're looking at a whole season, and this is another way to set goals. Your A goal for the race, or your A race, would be Lost Lake, but you would have maybe some B and C races in between that to kind of gauge your progress, to see how you're doing, to see where you might need to work on. So the B goals, the A goal is like, this is important. Like, I'm going to be disappointed if I don't make my A goal in my A race. I'm going to be slightly disappointed, you know. If I make my B goal in my A race, I'll feel pretty good. If I only make my C goal, I might question what happened in that race, you know, because that's what you're really shooting for. But those B and C races along the way, they're not as important. So you kind of have to put your ego on the back, especially if you're a faster person. You have to go, okay, this race is just to keep me race sharp, so I know what it feels like to race, but I'm not going to put out as hard effort as I might in my A race. And I got to put my ego on the back, and these are my goals. I'm going to maybe try out a different strategy. Maybe I'm going to try to eat something different, you know. So there's different ways you can use those B and C races to get ready for your A race.
Would you try to mix those up, or would you maybe just try to do only mountain races, like maybe say do Bird Ridge or Mount Marathon, or would you have them do a mixture of 10Ks, maybe a half marathon, something like that?
It sort of depends, but I think because something like Bird Ridge is so different than Lost Lake, you know, I mean, most people are just power hiking that. They're not doing any running during it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it kind of depends on the race. I think it's valuable to occasionally, even if you're just a trail runner, get out there and do a 5 or a 10K on the road just to try to get some speed going.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what, especially as we age, when you're young, you want to go out there and go as fast as you can. I mean, I loved road racing when I was young because I just hammer it on the road, you know. But as you get older, it gets harder to really want to put yourself in that painful position, because the payoff isn't as great if you've been performing at a high level previously. You know, you're not going to be at that level anymore. You're not going to be winning the run for women or whatever. So when you're young, especially doing that, but when you're old, it's important because we lose that turnover more than anything. When you get old, you can go forever, but you lose the quickness, and that's something that you really don't want to lose. You want to try to hold on to as much as you can.
So to hold on to that, do you recommend cross training and other things to try to keep your strength and your agility? We've had folks come in and talk about strength training and yoga, diet and nutrition. I mean, how do those things play a role in what you just described?
You know, I think the number one thing that runners who are doing trail runs or marathons tend to neglect is doing speed work on the track. So that would be the number one thing. I would say, don't drop your speed work on the track. Now, I'll tell you, I'm totally guilty of it because I don't have a group to run with anymore because I'm coaching groups, so I'm not running with them. But that is the one thing I regret the most personally. And if I'm going to race, when I'm planning races, I get back to doing speed work on the track. Super important. Strength training. Again, as you age, it becomes more important, and especially the research shows it becomes very important for women to, even from a young age, to be strength training. I'm really lucky I had a coach in high school, again, going back to Anchorage as promoting girls' sports in all ways, that he got me into strength training. And I think I took weight training every semester in high school. You know, I loved it. So I had that early base of that. So yes, women especially, but men too, especially as you age, should be doing strength training. I have to admit, I'm not a yoga person. I've tried.
Yeah. How about stretching though? I mean, just trying to
Right.
keep yourself limber.
The research on stretching shows that if you are somebody who has not done any stretching and you take up a stretching routine, or if you're somebody who does a lot of stretching and quits their stretching routine, those are the people that are most risk of injury, actually. So I think that flexibility becomes a very individual, I think it's pretty individual. You know, everybody's different in that aspect. And if you look at the top performing runners, especially, not so much triathletes, because triathletes do need more flexibility in terms of like being in a certain position on your bike, and in swimming. Those are sports that require you to have more flexibility. Whereas running, actually, the tighter you are, you have like that tight rubber band that you've created in your leg that delivers this energy for you. So on running, unless you're somebody who's been doing a lot of stretching, it's not necessarily helpful to start a huge stretching routine.
And then when do you stretch? Do you run a little then stretch? Do you stretch after you run? Is it you just kind of ask the person how they feel best?
When I do, so in the fall, I have running groups that are focused more on off-season training, and we do a lot of trail running during that time and a lot of running drills, and I do a lot of stretching during that time. But what I do is dynamic stretching. So when you're about to do a workout or go out on a run, you don't want to do static, stationary stretches, because you're actually bringing yourself down at that point. So you want to save those static, stationary stretches for after your run is over. When you're starting to cool down, you can sit down in one place or stand in one place. But before you start a workout, especially a high intensity workout, you want to do dynamic stretches. So you want to do stretches where you're actually moving. Maybe you're standing on one leg and bending over with a straight leg so that you're stretching your hamstring. Maybe you're moving your leg out and doing like a over the hurdle type of stretch to move your hip out laterally. So those are things that you would want to do in the beginning, because they're going to start to bring you up. You want to get your system prepared to go even higher than that. So the last thing you want to do is start by stretching sitting down on the ground.
I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like you prescribe both, maybe dynamic at the beginning, but then when you're all done, it might be worthwhile to do some static stretches as part of the cool down effort.
Right. A great example actually just occurred to me is swimmers. So if you see swimmers before meets, and this as a swimmer, like lots of arm circles, really like, creasily faster arm circles, and that's a stretch. Yeah. Or jumping up and down, things like that, because you're getting your body to go up, not come down.
Right. If you see Michael Phelps, if you've seen him, when he gets up on the swim blocks, he takes his arms and he flaps them, and they go all the way around the back of his body and come back out, which is really a stretch. He's stretching his whole entire upper body when he does that, his pecs and the shoulder blades.
Yep.
And he also demonstrates how incredibly flexible he is when he can do that.
Right.
My arms don't go there. But he's got 28 gold medals or something.
Right, exactly. He's got the genetics behind it.
He really does. Just quick sidebar, I went back and looked at his age group records, and when he was 12 years old, he was incredibly fast.
Oh yeah.
This kid has been a national champion from a very early age. I mean, this wasn't he went to the Olympics at 15 and made the finals in the 200-meter butterfly. So he's a phenomenon. Yeah. Anyway, so how about diet? Well, we talked about stretching. And sleep? I'm told sleep is incredibly important.
Oh yeah. I was looking for this book I read on sleep, and then I remembered that my massage therapist had given it to me, and I gave it back to him afterwards. Which, by the way, massage is super important, and I'm always shocked by how many people don't get regular massages. I mean, it's hard right now. And like
Do you do deep tissue massage or just a regular massage?
Yeah, like a sports massage. Yeah. And then if I have anything in particular, you know, I'll have him focus on the spot, you know, and he'll get deeper. I mean, some massage can be painful, but all of that body work is super important. And it's really important to get on top of things before they get bad.
Do you think it's the moving of the fascia between the fascia and the muscle that creates more blood flow that helps the recovery process? Or what do you think it is with massage that makes it so valuable?
I think it's the increased blood flow is part of it. I think that they're also oftentimes breaking up, you know, any adhesions inside, you know, the muscles and the fascia. The fascial work has become way more important. I did an outdoor explorer where I talked to a physical therapist who does a lot of fascial work, and she does dry needling and she said, you know, when she first started in PT school like 25 years ago, there was like no sense of how important fascia was. Like they didn't think it needed treatment, that it was just this tissue that just kind of hung out there. And now they're really realizing how important that is to performance and keeping people healthy, and how a lot of injury is around the fascial problems with adhesions in the fascia.
Fantastic. So yeah. If that's something someone can afford, both time and money, you recommend that how often? Once a week or?
You know, if I could afford it, I would go and get a massage once a week. If you're doing a lot of heavy training, once a week for sure. You know, at the bare minimum, once a month. You know, but like me personally, I try to go every 2 weeks. So not right now. I mean, I haven't had a massage in like 2 or 3 months. It's killing me.
I know. Well, you know, and there's no such thing as a virtual massage. I mean, what do you do?
Right, exactly.
So when you find a massage therapist, let's chase this rabbit hole a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Can you recommend people? And I mean, there's a difference between someone where you're going in just for a relaxing massage and what you've called a sports massage, I would think. Right. So you probably have to look for someone that specializes and knows the muscles and the physiology well enough that they know as a runner, your hamstrings are probably tight, maybe your hips need to be loosened up, versus a swimmer where it's probably a lot of shoulder and upper back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sometimes if you don't have a sports massage person already, it's a matter of like trying a bunch of different people out. Because sometimes it is just, they might say, they might all be doing sports massage, but they have just different amount of pressure or just the way they're moving. I mean, it's really, your massage therapist is a really personal thing. And so I think if you don't have one, I would like go for 5 or 6 months to 5 or 6 different massage therapists until when you find somebody, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's the person I want to keep, you know, and you'll keep going to that person. You'll know when they're doing the right thing on you.
Oh, okay. How about sleep?
Okay, so sleep. So he gave me this book on sleep, and it was just really this amazing book talking about how important sleep is. You know, that's really when recovery happens. And so if you're not getting enough sleep, it's really hard not to recover. And I was actually meeting with a client yesterday who was going to do Lost Lake, and she just had a baby in November. It's her second baby. She's running just like kind of the example you gave. She's running like 30 to 45 minutes once to twice a week. And so we could get her to Lost Lake. I mean, she could do Lost Lake if she did it conservatively, but it's going to be tight because there's not much time to Lost Lake at this point, you know. But then she started thinking about it, and she was like, you know, I'm just not really getting very much sleep right now. She goes, her daughter is like sleeping for about 2 hours, and then she wakes up and she has to nurse her, and there's all these demands on her body now because of this too. She's like, so let's just do training for a month and reassess and see if it looks realistic at that point. So I thought that was really great of her to recognize that this sleep is this other huge component of your training. Mm-hmm. So if you're not getting enough sleep, you can't recover, and you will put yourself at higher risk of injury. Mm-hmm. Which again, the number one goal, remember, is to get to the start of the race feeling pretty good. Like you don't have any injuries when you get to the start of the race.
Right. I really appreciate that aspect, because I train, but I train in a completely different venue. I just lift weights, right? I mean, my goal is to be stronger. But of course, as you push your body up in weight, the opportunity for injury presents itself as you get heavier and heavier weights. So you have to be very, very careful and remember that one injury could mean 3 or 4 months that you're sitting on the sidelines. And you know, so as soon as I feel something tweak, I call it a tweak, something just not right, I shut it down. And so I think as athletes, it doesn't matter whether you're a weight trainer, swimmer, runner, biker. As soon as you feel something that's abnormal, my feeling is you got to just shut it down for the day, come back and fight another day, but don't push yourself and let that ego get you to the point where you're going, oh, I can do this. And then all of a sudden you've got a bad injury and now you can't train. And that takes you right out of the game.
I totally agree. And so many people just keep pushing at that, thinking that it's like they just need to be a little tougher, you know, or put the pain aside, and they end up out for a long time. And then, yeah, you want to be able to do this forever, really. So
incrementally, do you increment, your increments like 5% or 10%? How do you judge how much of an additional load you put on the body as you progress through your training regime over those, say, 6 months to a Lost Lake run?
Well, the idea in running is that 10% is a safe amount to put on to each individual in your overall mileage for the week or your overall time. So yeah, if you look at like 45 minutes, like 10% isn't very much. It's 4.5 minutes. So like if I had somebody starting with a long run at 45 minutes, the first week they might do 45 minutes, the next week 50 minutes, and the next week 55 minutes, 3 weeks in a row. And then the fourth week should always be a recovery week. And that's where you cut back to that, 45 minutes, and everything's easy and you get recovered and hopefully you're getting more sleep. And then you're ready to start the next cycle of training, which then would go 1 hour. And then at that point, depending on how close we were, if we needed to push it, I might go 1 hour and 10 minutes the next week, 1 hour and 20 minutes the week after. Once you get up to about 2 hours of running, then you can start to chunk out at 15 minutes. So you can go 2 hours, 2:15, 2:30, with always the fourth week being a cutback to between 45 minutes and an hour long run.
So it's so interesting that there's a direct analogy for strength training, and they call it wave training. They'll do a 3 or 4 week progression, just like you described, where you'll increment the amount of weight, and then they call it a deload week, where you just take and you just deload, let the body rest and recover, and then you come back in, but you come back into the next wave a little higher than you were in the previous, well, usually a month, and then you step it back up, and then you deload, and then you do it again. So it's interesting to hear that same thing is done in training with running. Is that also the same with skiing and swimming and some of these other sports?
Yeah, it's definitely with all the aerobic, with the triathlon sports for sure. It's like a 10% increase per week is considered what's the safest. Now, one of the things that as more people are getting older and continuing to participate in sports, they are looking at maybe 3 weeks of increased training load is too much for older people. And maybe you're just going to do 2 weeks of increased training load, then take a rest week. Then 2 weeks and take a rest week. So there can be variations on that, but definitely you shouldn't go more than 3 weeks before you take a rest week. So, and then even as you get even older, maybe you're only going to do 1 week of really hard training, then a week of recovery, 1 week and a week of recovery. It gets so individual, but you really do have to acknowledge that as you get older, you're probably going to need, number one, more warm-up time on stuff. I mean, takes me 30 minutes now before I feel good on any run, and that you're going to need more rest.
Yeah. How about let's hit diet? It seems like it's a three-legged stool. There's the training, sleep, and diet.
Yeah.
How do you coach people on diet?
So I don't do a lot of. I'll refer people out if they need more help on diet, because again, diet becomes that is super individualized. Without a doubt, if you're an endurance athlete, though, you need more carbohydrates. And So if you're being told that you need to be on a low carbohydrate diet, in the very least, you shouldn't be doing that during a heavy training load or training cycle for a race. Maybe you do that during the off season.
Mm-hmm.
I know there are some people that operate better with lower carbohydrates and higher protein or fat. So that is individual, but we know that in endurance exercise, you have to have those available carbohydrates, both in your bloodstream and then also your stored carbohydrates, not only to use initially and at certain intensities for your energy, but also as a way to access fat as your primary source of energy. Because, 20 minutes, 30, 40 minutes into an endurance activity, you start to make this shift towards using more fat as your primary fuel source. But you need carbohydrates to get there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So would you prescribe then, if there's a long run, someone bringing along a carbohydrate drink or some carbohydrate food that they can ingest while they're running to kind of replenish their muscles?
So that's like depends on how long you're going to be out there. So if you are doing Lost Lake in 2 hours or less, it's quite possible that you don't need any additional carbohydrates for that race or for a training run that long, if you've had a good breakfast. So if you had the couple days leading up to the race, you had good carbohydrate intake and you had a good breakfast before you started. Now, I know at least one high-level endurance athlete in this town, and he's competed at the world level in triathlon, that he cannot eat before a race. He cannot choke anything down. So he has to really start to take in carbohydrates during the race and maybe at a slightly higher level if he can't get that breakfast beforehand, because the breakfast just really gets, it gets you out of your fast from the night and gives you a little bit of boost to start with. So when you're training for a long event, up to 2 hours, you might want to train yourself not to use any additional carbohydrates during that time, because it is going to train your energy system to start to go, okay, I can go to my stored carbohydrates, or maybe I had a banana right before I started and I can access fat sooner. So you want to train your body to access that fat as soon as possible. However, if you're going to be over 2 hours, that's kind of an hour and a half to 2 hours is the critical time for most people when they need to start fueling during the activity.
Wow.
For a 2 hour event, you could train yourself not to have to have any additional carbohydrates. I'm going to make an exception on this, and I'm going to say a race like something like Lava Man, which a lot of people go to in Kona, Olympic distance triathlon, because you need so much salt in that race because it's hot and you're sweating out a lot of salt, which can happen here too. Salt, fluid, and carbohydrates work together to pull each other into the cells to use when you're in a race or in a training situation. So if you just went water and salt, you may not be able to efficiently get all of those into your cell that you need. So you really need some carbohydrates at the right solution. It's a 6 to 8% carbohydrate solution is what you need.
I'll be darned. Wow.
So, yeah, this can get really deep.
It's a very interesting topic. And what it says to me, and we're going to kind of have to wrap up here. We're getting close to the end of the hour, but it's this: when you get to a certain point with training, you need to really, someone like yourself is really essential, because you've been able to kind of look at all these different aspects and you say, I've seen that in other people. Here's a place to start, or here's some suggestions, or here's some things to do that will be very time efficient for someone to be able to optimize their performance. Mm-hmm. And I think, when I think of a coach, I think, I want to optimize my performance. I want to do the best I possibly can. I've got a target, and they're going to help me get there. So when I did my very first bodybuilding show, I went and got Steph Figarelli to help me, because she knows her stuff. And it was absolutely essential. I mean, she stepped me through the process and got me, it was a 6-7 month training process. And yeah, it turned out pretty good in the end. I got there and, my goal was to be able to stand up and not embarrass myself. So,
yeah, that's a good goal.
I was 54 at the time. So I thought, well,
that's awesome.
Running a little late, but yeah, what the heck. So, so if I'm someone that can't afford a coach, what kind of resources would you recommend for folks, books, video blogs, YouTube channels, for them to maybe get a little smarter so they can optimize their performance on their own?
So Runner's World has lots of, training for beginners type programs or even intermediate. So, I mean, Runner's World for runners is always a great resource, and they have lots of trail running stuff. There's, in terms of nutrition, in fact, I have it back here. This is a great book called Racing Weight by Matt Fitzgerald. And, Matt Fitzgerald, I got to turn it that way.
Yeah.
He has a lot of just I think he's got trail running books too. So he writes for Runner's World. He's very well known. What I love about this book, kind of quickly going back to diet too, is at the very end, he has all these diets of different professional athletes. And one of them is Keegan Randall. And what is kind of amazing to see is the difference between her diet and like Shalane Flanagan, who's like one of the top marathoners, and Keegan eats so much food and Shalane hardly eats anything. It's pretty amazing to read. And I even anybody who's doing endurance stuff, I would not say you should eat Shalane Flanagan's diet because there's not enough fuel in that really. But so anyway,
you get calories from air.
Right, exactly. I mean, I don't know where her calories are coming from, but in running, unfortunately, we are so, your weight does play a big role in how fast you can go and how much energy you can expend. And this can get a little bit too much about you should be this thin or whatever, which I wouldn't really say, but everything else, like the how-to, I think, is like how you should be eating, what you should be looking for, I thought was really helpful in this book. And then this is called Fast After 50 by Joe Friel. And Joe Friel, he also wrote the Triathlete's Training Bible, the Cyclist Training Bible. I mean, he's kind of like the triathlon coach that everybody knows. And he really talks a lot about training if you're over the age of 50, and going back again to what we miss out on a lot is the really high intensity training. Like, we don't do enough high intensity training, and we should be. So I think this is a good resource as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, those are wonderful references. Of course, I'm going to include some links. So if people want to get in touch with you in the Facebook post that follows this, and also with the YouTube video itself, I'll leave there's some links you gave me on how to get in touch with you. As we wrap up, I always kind of ask the question, what's the one message you would like the people that see this video to take home with them? The one thing you'd like them to remember of the nearly hour we spent together?
I think this process should be fun. And so that is, when I'm coaching people, I always emphasize the fun part of it. That doesn't mean that you're going to have fun every single moment of the day. But I think you should look at the overall journey and the race as like, yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that. And so you need to figure out what makes it fun for you. And one thing we didn't even touch on, which I can kind of bring into this, is gadgets. And I have to say, I've been in this for such a long time. I've been competing since I was like 12 years old. I've been at a high level for a long time. When gadgets came around, when heart rate monitors, that was the first gadget, that took completely all the joy out of it for me. And I don't use any gadgets except an Ironman Timex watch occasionally. So when you're looking to train for something like this, you got to figure out, that doesn't mean that might be something that really gives you joy. So you have to, if you're going to find a coach, or if you're reading information online about how to devise a training program, you need to figure out what is going to bring you joy. And if the gadgets bring you joy, great. Go with a coach who's into that. Go with the training recommendations that you find online with that. But if you like to, if the joy is, you like to feel, think about the feeling first and how you feel when you're doing all these things, then you have to look for a coach who's going to help you with that. And there's me on that side, and there's plenty of coaches in town who are on the gadget side. So, you can find it anywhere.
So you're really like the Maria Kondo of physical training.
I am. I am very simple.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you today for spending some time with us and telling us a bit about training. I think you've given us a lot of things to think about. Looking at 6 months for training for something as long as a Lost Lake run, breaking the run down, thinking about the importance, how we age and the things and our expectations. I think those are wonderful messages, and I hope folks who watch this will benefit from that. I certainly have, and I appreciate your time today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Pat. It's been great. I've had a blast.
Thanks. All right. Bye-bye.